when you saw my Steven Universe Season 2 intro, I wasn't messing with you, because when you saw the intro of Steven protecting Uncle Grandpa from the Crystal Gems, I wasn't fooling you. I was intentionally gonna be reviewing this episode despite the fact that I'm not a fan of Uncle Grandpa. But at the same time, since that this is a crossover that is non-canon to the series, since it was mentioned by Uncle Grandpa himself, I'm going to assume that doing the crossover with Steven with other Cartoon Network shows aside from Uncle Grandpa didn't come up in the mind, since that the people who made Uncle Grandpa probably think that it would have worked that centers around Steven Universe characters. Since that the only characters from Uncle Grandpa are Mr. Gus and Pizza Steve, they're probably aware that Uncle Grandpa can't be able to carry a crossover episode, despite the time where Uncle Grandpa made fun of the Kids' Choice Awards by having Uncle Grandpa win all the awards, which is a jab against SpongeBob winning all the Kids' Choice Awards. 2015 was literally the time where Uncle Grandpa was way ahead of its time, while everyone else wasn't, since that they were mainly focusing on the qualities of Steven Universe, and when they see Uncle Grandpa interacting with Steven, they weren't ready for the greatness of what Uncle Grandpa is. And I'm only saying that because Uncle Grandpa has been getting praise when it comes to the Warner Bros. Discovery situation. Well, it hasn't been removed on HBO Max or Max, and if it is removed, I'm pretty sure that people show the respect towards the show a lot more, since it wasn't that bad as it was back then from their own perspective. And watching it now, it really feels like the show itself is supposed to be its own thing, since that the message is that we don't judge people on being weird. As far as I'm concerned, that message is debatable depending on what person it is, but I was never into the idea of Uncle Grandpa being one of the worst cartoons by beating it to the ground, considering that I was focusing on the hatred towards Teen Titans Go, since that it's a much more worse show in comparison to Uncle Grandpa. But the plot to this episode is mainly Steven hanging out with Uncle Grandpa while the Crystal Gems think that he's a stranger, or in other words, Greg's brother or father or something like that, and they try to stop him. And the message that I stated before is that we don't attack someone who is weird, because that's what Uncle Grandpa is. He's weird. And as far as I'm concerned, this episode isn't good, but it's not one of the worst episodes, nor one of the worst crossovers. I think that the biggest problem with this episode is mainly the fact that it's not trying too hard to be a crossover, which is somewhat a good idea in comparison to Rugrats Go Wild. But the thing is, since that people are not really into Uncle Grandpa and are mostly into Steven Universe more, then I'm pretty sure that they just don't expect weirdness when it comes to different qualities from Uncle Grandpa to be crossovered with Steven Universe. Like, when people think of good crossovers back at the time of 2015, which this episode came out, they were thinking of the crossovers of Adventure Time, regular show, Adventure Time, Amazing World of Gumball, regular show, Amazing World of Gumball. And when it comes to this show, they were expecting it to cross over with Adventure Time, regular show, or the Amazing World of Gumball. As far as I'm concerned, you can easily tell that they will have more potential on making those as good crossovers in comparison to Uncle Grandpa. But at the very least, they made this episode entertaining that is humorous, and I can admit that they actually made Paul really over the top. Like, I'm pretty sure that if the people working on Uncle Grandpa took over the Steven Universe episode, they probably liked Paul so much that she wanted the actress playing Paul go over the top with the lines, especially the animation on her. Believe me when I say this, I'm starting to convince that the purpose of this episode being non-canon is because, to tell you the truth, if Steven Universe did have a crossover with the other Cartoon Network shows, it would still be non-canon regardless. I'm into crossovers. There may be a few bad ones, but at the same time, crossovers is a really huge deal. The thing is that I don't think that Steven Universe is the type of show that can handle crossovers when it comes to television. I did do a crossover with it when it comes to the Christmas story that I did 2 Christmases ago when it comes to OKKO, along with the Steven Universe of the Creek crossover that centers around Steven hanging out with the Quake of the Creek characters. But when you think about television, there's pretty much a reason onto why most cartoons like Steven Universe barely gets a crossover, and with this being the closest crossover we're ever going to get, I can't imagine what the Wires would do if they have Steven Universe crossover with the other Cartoon Network shows. There are possibilities, don't get me wrong. But after watching this episode, despite being entertaining, it made me feel like that sometimes crossovers aren't really for everything when it comes to shows, when they're being executed in this level of insanity. It may be entertainment and insanity, but at the same time, insanity when it comes to the ways of going out of bounds when it comes to making this episode entertaining. But since that this is the first time I ever talked about Uncle Grandpa, despite being this a Summerpalooza 5 Steven Universe marathon, I'm just gonna say this right now. I'm still not into his show, nor the character itself. And it's mainly the fact that he's just a little too much for me to actually find enjoyment out of. Like, I'm starting to convince that for how Cartoon Network had promoted the show, they're really trying to add variety, but at the same time, if I ever watch an episode from Uncle Grandpa, I will probably have mixed opinions because, to tell you the truth, in comparison to other cartoons, they're mostly important over Uncle Grandpa. I may be entertained, but at the same time, I can still be entertained by other cartoons that take themselves a little too seriously, mainly Steven Universe. But the biggest highlight in this entire crossover, aside from the insanity entertainment, is when Mr. Gus said the word multiverse. In 2015, before the 2020s decade, where movie studios took multiverse into legitimately seriously in those stories that really showcased that after the success of Spider-Man No Way Home, they took inspiration from that movie, but not the crossovers where we can actually take the multiverse seriously. But we will probably think about crossovers rather than the word multiverse. I need to be really honest that the reason why I'm not into the multiverse when it comes to films is mainly the fact that they're just jumping on the bandwagon in order to be successful. But considering that the DC film The Flash did terribly at the box office last year, there is more going on into making a film that is somewhat suitable for people to enjoy without any backlash going on, and you don't really need the multiverse in order to make a movie entertaining, because it's not going to save yourself from the problems of what The Flash had. I didn't watch the movie, but I'm fully aware of all the problems centering around Ezra Miller. I know I spelled his name wrong, but since I've mentioned his name, you pretty much knew where I'm coming from. Well, this was an interesting experience, despite the fact that I did not like this episode that much. It is entertaining, and I did like how Mr. Gus said the multiverse since that he has knowledge of, but at the same time, this episode, after rewatching it, still didn't get me invested into Uncle Grandpa, but at the same time, I don't disrespect it and bash on it. If anything, the more I think about the multiverse in this episode, despite being pleased, is the fact that Uncle Grandpa is the controller of the Cartoon Network universe by overcoming time and space and completely going into different worlds, judging of the ending of him meeting other characters from other cartoons. Maybe it kind of shows onto why he won so many rewards with his episode centering around a parody of the Kids' Choice Awards by making fun of the Kids' Choice Awards of SpongeBob winning every time, but it will take time for me to actually understand that if I'm ever into Uncle Grandpa, which I have little plans on to. I'm giving this episode a 5.75 out of 10.